The corner went quiet the moment the boy stopped under the buzzing street lamp. Small, steady, and out of place. That was all the bald man needed before his grin widened. "Nice jacket, kid," he said, blocking the sidewalk. "You lose your babysitter?" His two shadows laughed. The boy didn't. He just stood there, eyes clear, breathing even. Then a black sedan behind him exhaled as its rear window slid down an inch. Chrome caught the light like a thin blade. Laughter shortened. "Stick with me to the end, because what happens on this curb will change how you hear fear. Before we roll in, tap a like, tell me where you're watching from, and listen close." Now, step into Southbridge after midnight. Fog lay low between the buildings. A lamppost hummed over a chipped red curb. Rico Darnell drifted out of the dark with Jax and Dino, boots skimming puddles, chain low on his chest, knuckles caged in fingerless leather. Rico ruled these blocks the way a lockjaw dog rules a yard. Bite first, smile later. That's when he saw the boy. Faded red jacket, scuffed work boots, curls damp with mist. No phone, no panic, just quiet. "Yo," he said, sliding into the kid's path. "You sightseeing?" Jax barked. Dino wheezed. The boy didn't blink. Across the curb, the sedan idled like a held breath, black paint drinking the streetlight. Inside, a man sat angled toward the glass, face in shadow, eyes like coals. Rico closed a gloved hand on the boy's shoulder. "I'm talking to you." The kid's posture didn't change. "You shouldn't touch me," he said. Soft, not scared. Jax snorted. Dino muttered, "We got manners, class." Rico squeezed, more for the windows than the point. The sedan's rear window lowered another inch, smooth as a blade. Streetlight skimmed a pale cheekbone, the corner of an unamused mouth, a cufflink like a tiny star. The sound traveled like thunder. Jax's laugh clipped short. "You're about to learn 3 things at once: how a bully measures himself, how a father measures patience, and how a city measures silence. Watch the boy's boots. The whole scene balances on where he plants them. Southbridge wore its history in rust. Fire escapes snagged the fog like nets. Shuttered bodegas hid behind metal grins. Rico had carved his name into these corners, while bigger names fought over fancier turf uptown. He wasn't a cartel. Down here he didn't need to be. Fear is local. "Fancy boots," Rico said, turning the boy slightly to show him off. "Bet they came with a matching daddy." He leaned close enough to fog the kid's cheek. The boy's eyes flicked, not to Rico but past him, a glance like checking a watch you don't wear. The window held still, just low enough for a gaze to travel. Pride heard the music and missed the drum. "I'm supposed to be here," the boy said. Rico grinned wider. "Supposed to be?" He looked up and down the sidewalk. "Hear that, boys?" The tourist got a permit. Jax shifted. Dino tugged his sleeve. Neither liked the car. In this city there were vehicles you saluted and vehicles you avoided. This one made men remember chores inside. Rico tapped the jacket with 2 fingers. "Names matter on this block. Mine is Rico. What's yours?" The boy's mouth opened once, closed once, then settled. He didn't answer. Rico's smile thinned. "Polite is free," he said, and gave the shoulder a harder turn. Inside the sedan, a silhouette lifted a hand a fraction, a conductor's cue. The driver's eyes flicked to the mirror. The man in back blinked once, like disappointment in a suit. "Don't ignore me," Rico said, louder now, voice pitched for the bricks. Jax stepped closer, Dino to the far side, a triangle around the boy. The kid stared at Rico's chain like a pendulum. Then came the sound that ends laughter. A door latch clicking once. The rear door eased an inch and waited. Fog curled into the gap. Rico tried to chuckle and heard the thinness. "Look at this," he said, nodding at the car. "Chauffeur wants directions." The boy turned toward the opening and said, Clear as a bell. From that car. Not a plea, a location. Rico frowned. What? The gap widened. Tinted glass gave way to a face cut from winter. The eyes were the still part of a storm. They looked at the boy first, measured, certain, then moved to Rico. You can tell what a man is by how much noise he needs. Rico remembered an old lesson he had ignored. We were just talking, he said, letting his hand fall as if it had always been on its way down. Kids out late? The man didn't reply. He didn't need to. Two suited shapes slid from the front seats, one holding the door, the other looking everywhere at once. The door opened fully. Shoe leather kissed wet concrete. The street lamp painted a thin crown on a silver cufflink. Maybe a lion if you stood close. Rico's jaw worked. Jax swallowed. Dino studied the curb. The boy stood exactly where he had stood since the start, boots braced on red paint. Stay with me, because what the man in that coat says next will explain the difference between loud threats and quiet verdicts. He stepped closer, not fast, not slow, and stopped where a whisper could cross. You put your hand on my son. Rico's mouth opened, spilling half an apology. I didn't know. You don't need to know my name to understand respect. The gaze flicked to the boy. Did he frighten you? No, sir. Good. A pause. Then you've learned what fear looks like when it belongs to someone else. Rico felt his knees misremember strength. The chain on his chest seemed heavier. The man leaned in, said something only Rico heard, and straightened. No threat. No promise. A tide withdrawing. His name would be spoken later, in rooms where people lower their voices. Adrian Marcelli, the lion who didn't need to roar. The door closed, the window lifted. The street remembered to breathe. On Southbridge, stories don't end. They deepen, and every corner remembers who taught it to keep quiet. What you saw at the curb is only the surface of an old river. Now step back from the mist into the house where that voice was forged, and the lesson that sent a boy to stand in fog without blinking. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us keep these stories alive. And trust me, the best part is yet to come. Now, let's get back to it. The door seal absorbed the city like a thick velvet curtain. Outside, mist, sodium light, laughter edging toward menace. Inside, leather, dark wood, the faint cologne that clung to a man who never rushed. Adrian Marcelli sat angled toward the gap his door had left a moment ago, the glass rising until it framed the street like a stage. He watched the boy place his boots where he'd been taught to place them. Heels grounded, toes open, balance low. He watched the men who mistook noise for power loosen their jaws and prepare to bark again. Hold, he said, though he didn't need the word. His men in the front already knew the rule. If the lion wanted thunder, he'd ask for rain first. Santo, the driver, kept both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, jaw set. Mauro, riding shotgun, sat with his wrists on his knees, not moving, not breathing any more than necessary. The silence between them was practiced, the kind forged over a dozen winters and twice as many wars. Adrian's finger rested against the leather armrest. He lifted it once, the smallest movement, and the air in the cabin seemed to obey. Not yet, that finger said. Not yet. On the curb, the bald man in the chain, Rico, Adrian recalled, Southbridge noisemaker, middleweight predator on a small pond, tightened his grip on the boy's shoulder. Eli didn't flinch. His chin didn't jump. His eyes didn't search for the car. He let the insult land like rain on a coat. Registered, not absorbed. Good, Adrian thought. The first lesson sticks. This wasn't an accident. It was a crucible. The neighborhood had been chosen for its bite, the hour for its lean hunger, the street for its tendency to spin out stories. Adrian hadn't thrown his son to wolves. He'd led him to the edge of their track and said, "Listen to how they breathe." A boy who would grow up in the shadow of a house like Marcelli's couldn't inherit steel by looking at it under glass. He needed to feel heat and decide whether to sweat or stand. The sedan's cabin held the city at a remove, like a museum case. Adrian's reflection hovered in the glass over Rico's grin. The carved cheekbones he'd carried since his own father's funeral. The calm mouth that had closed rooms without raising a syllable. Lines at his eyes, not from laughter but from choosing not to show it. A faint white scar under the jawline, old enough to be memory. He had never said how he'd gotten it. Eli had asked once. Adrian told him, "From a day I mistook volume for certainty." "Sir," Mauro said quietly, "he's touching the boy." Adrian's gaze didn't shift. The boy had said the line they practiced. "You shouldn't touch me. Not bravado. Not a dare." The sentence was a mirror. It made men see themselves before they reached for more. "We act if he breaks a bone," Adrian said, "not for insult. Insult is wind." Santo's knuckles whitened on the wheel and then released. He was a father. It took discipline not to be all father all the time. The air pressed closer in the car as the laughter outside tried to hook the boy. Adrian closed his eyes, not in prayer but in recall, and the sedan dissolved into marble and shadow. The Marcelli house at night was a church of old victories. Oil portraits watched the hall, the men in them wearing cufflinks like stars and expressions carved from granite. Adrian walked the length with a boy at his side, both of them barefoot to honor the cold. Eli's hand had been smaller then, his stride trying to match a father's cadence. The floor didn't creak. Creaking floors were for houses that didn't expect footsteps. They entered the study. A lamp lit the desk in a circle of old gold. Books lined 3 walls, each volume a square inch of someone else's certainty. "Power isn't loud, Eli," Adrian said, opening a drawer and setting a watch on the desk. "It's the silence before the storm." He left the second hand ticking. For 1 minute, they stood listening. "What do you hear?" Adrian asked. "The watch," Eli said. "What else?" Eli listened harder. The house shuffled 1 floor up. A furnace exhaled behind the wall. Somewhere, 3 rooms away, a woman laughed, and the laugh died into a whisper because laughter died into whispers in this house after midnight. "Everything," Eli said at last. Adrian nodded. A man who hears everything doesn't need to raise his voice. If you ever shout, shout for someone who deserves the truth and can survive it. Never for control. Control is quiet. He placed the watch in Eli's palm. The boy's fingers closed around time. "Southbridge," Adrian said, naming the first test. "You will walk. You will not seek trouble, but you will not avoid it by crossing the street. If trouble finds you, you will stand where you are. You will speak in sentences. You will not break eye contact to ask for me. If I am needed, I will be there faster than your heart can decide whether to speed up. But I want your heart to decide well without me." "What if I get afraid?" Eli asked. "Then you name the fear before it names you," Adrian said. "Fear hates its own reflection." In the car, the memory closed like a book returning to its shelf. Outside, Rico laughed, too brightly, like a man performing for an audience that had suddenly grown important. He pushed Eli against the car door, just enough to prove he owned an inch of air. Eli absorbed the contact and planted the heel of his boot where red curb met concrete. The pose was not defiance. It was geometry. Adrian felt something in his chest ease and something else go taut. "Now," Mauro whispered, when the chain brushed Eli's cheek. Adrian lifted a finger. Not yet. Rico's mouth formed words meant to cut, jokes about accents, about shoes that didn't come from Southbridge, about fathers who buy courage like they buy jackets. Adrian watched the boy choose stillness each time a response wanted to climb into his face. The discipline wasn't to be stone. The discipline was to be water. Stone breaks. Water learns the cup, then overfills it. Santo's eyes touched the mirror. He was waiting for the breath that meant go. Adrian exhaled once. The cabin's temperature felt 2 degrees colder, though the vents hadn't changed. "Sir," Santo said, not moving his lips, "there's a patrol at the end of the block." "Black and white. Lights off." "They'll keep their heads down," Adrian said. "Tonight they're deaf." He thought of the nights he'd failed this same lesson under the eyes of the men in the portraits. Nights he'd gone hunting noise with noise, and come home with less of himself than he'd left with. His father had taught him restraint with a backhand the first time. He taught himself the rest looking into mirrors and deciding what kind of man he wanted to see. Rico leaned in, breath hazing the boy's cheek, the chain cold against cotton. Eli's eyes flicked, not to beg, but to mark the distance to the curb. He could have stepped away. He did not. Those boots, those scuffed toes, the stance his grandfather once showed Adrian in a courtyard with pebbles and a cane. These were the Marcelli line, translated into a boy who could keep still while 3 wolves tried to teach him how to run. The pressure inside the car concentrated into a single point under Adrian's sternum. He could feel the room behind his ribs, the lamp lit, the watch ticking, the portraits watching, the boy listening. One more nudge from Rico and Adrian would end the lesson, even if it meant ending the man. The nudge came. "Enough," Mauro said, the first word he'd spoken with heat in a year. Adrian lifted his finger. "Now." The driver's hand hovered near the door switch. Instead of a barked command, Adrian gave a nod. Nothing in him rose, everything tightened. The window lowered on the slow motor, glass sinking like a tide. Fog rolled in, soft and intimate. The street's soundtrack faltered. Jax's laugh died halfway through a consonant. Dino's head dipped, like a man remembering a prayer halfway through sin. Adrian stepped out only in the imagination of the men who feared him. In truth, he moved nothing but air and intention. The door would open in 10 more seconds, not 5. He watched those seconds pass across Rico's face. Confusion, then recognition, then the first twinge of the nausea that comes when a predator realizes something older is looking at him from higher on the food chain. Santo's voice was a thread. "Your word, sir." Adrian considered his son's profile in the glass, the cheek firm, the mouth steady. He measured the boy's stillness against the risk. He measured the man on the curb against what Southbridge would learn from mercy versus spectacle. He raised his hand from the armrest and let it hover, one finger extended, as if testing rain from a roofline. 10 seconds more, he said softly. Let him choose his last inch. Outside, the bald man's fingers relented without knowing why. Maybe he felt the temperature drop. Maybe he heard a story he'd tried not to believe. Maybe he simply found his own reflection in a boy's eyes and didn't like what looked back. He pushed one last time anyway, because habits don't end. They erode. Adrian touched the door handle. Leather creaked, an expensive sound in a cheap night. The city leaned in. "Open," he said. Santo stepped out. Mauro followed. The door moved like a verdict beginning. Fog rose to meet the hinge. The world outside recalculated around the new geometry. Adrian set his soles on the wet street, as if placing a signature on paper. He did not look first at Rico. He looked at the boy. Eli's jaw saw him and didn't move. Good. The lesson had breathed and survived. Adrian turned his head toward the man who had touched a Marcelli and mistook that for an accomplishment. His voice, when it came, was not the blast of a horn, but the click of a lock. You put your hand on my son. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe and like this video. It helps more people discover stories like this one. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, take a deep breath, because what happens next will change everything. Rico Darnell lit his cigarette off the street lamp, the flame carving a brief gold halo around his grin. Southbridge's air was sour with rain and exhaust, the kind of smell you either got used to or died trying to clean out of your lungs. He took a drag, exhaled through his nose, and let the smoke drift over the quiet street like a flag. The black car down the block was still there, engine humming. He told himself it didn't matter. To everyone who mattered on this side of the river, Rico was king. Jax stood on his right, tall, broad, beard tangled like wire, tattoos running up his neck like ivy. Dino was the opposite, short, jittery, eyes darting like a man who'd seen too much and trusted too little. Together they ran Southbridge the way preachers ran pulpits, with ritual, threat, and audience. The city above the bridge belonged to men with suits and accents. Down here, respect wore hoodies and brass knuckles. Kings of the gutter, Jax liked to say. Rico didn't mind the phrasing. He'd built his crown from things no one else wanted. Scraps, debts, fear. Every shopkeeper paid his street fee. Every dealer owed him 10% and a quiet tongue. His rules kept the chaos predictable. He watched the kid standing by the car and laughed to himself. Fancy jacket, clean jeans, eyes too steady. Not from here. Kids from Southbridge looked at the ground or at your hands. They never stared long enough to see the chain around your neck or the knife clipped to your belt. Rico flicked the ash away and muttered, "Respect is what you take when nobody gives it." It was a phrase his uncle used to say before the cops put him away for 20 years. Rico lived by it. From the alley, a voice crept out, low, shaky, with the cough of too many nights sleeping near fumes. It was Slim, a local junkie who knew more about street rhythms than most cops. He shuffled closer, coat soaked, eyes darting toward the car. "Yo, Rico, you see that ride?" Slim rasped. "Ain't nobody drives through Southbridge this time of night. Not unless they ghosts or killers." Rico smirked. "Then I guess we're about to meet one." Slim shook his head hard enough to scatter raindrops. "Nah, man. I mean it. I seen that emblem before. Silver lion. That's Marcelli metal. You don't—" Rico cut him off with a raised hand. "You talk too much when you're sober, Slim. Go find a bottle." Jax laughed. Dino tried not to. Slim backed away, muttering to himself, "Suit yourself, King." His silhouette melted into the alley's darkness, swallowed by the hum of the rain. Rico turned his gaze back to the boy. Still there, still calm. His stillness was starting to itch at Rico's nerves. The kid should have cried by now, or begged, or at least backed up. Instead, he stood with that quiet, polished stare, like he was studying Rico, not fearing him. "You from uptown?" Rico asked, his voice sharp now. "That it? Lost your driver?" The boy didn't answer. The silence felt heavier than an insult. Rico took a step closer. He thought about his own first night on this street. 15 years old, fists bleeding, stealing from a dealer twice his size. The dealer's knife had cut deep, but not deep enough. Rico still had the scar. He wore it like proof. No father, no teacher, no help. He'd earned every inch of the ground beneath his boots. That's what made this kid so offensive. Everything about him screamed protection. The kind of safety money buys before you even learn what danger looks like. "Maybe I should teach you how Southbridge says hello," Rico said, flicking ash toward the boy's shoes. Jax snickered. "Kid's frozen. Maybe he ain't real." Dino muttered, "I don't like this, boss." Something off. Rico spun on him. "You scared of a car?" "Man, we run this block. But even as he said it, the words didn't taste as strong as they used to. The black sedan hadn't moved once. Its engine stayed low, a steady heartbeat under the fog. Headlights off, but every once in a while, he thought he saw a flicker of movement behind the tinted glass. He grinned again, louder this time, for his own reassurance. "Relax, some rich prick got lost. Maybe we tax him for directions." He tapped Jax on the shoulder. "Go peek the plate." Jax hesitated. "Man, what if—" "Just do it." Jax took a few steps forward, squinting through the mist. He bent down, wiping the drizzle off the plate with his sleeve. The second his eyes focused, his entire body stiffened. He stepped back fast. "Rico, that's—" Rico waved him off, pretending not to notice the fear twitching in Jax's hands. "What? You forget how to read?" Dino spoke up this time, voice small. "He's right, man. The lion, that's the Marcelli crest." The name hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. Rico had heard it before, whispered in bars, murmured by cops who drank too much. The Marcellis were the kind of story that kept gangsters from getting too ambitious. Old money, old blood, the family that made their enemies disappear so clean the street forgot they ever existed. Rico forced a chuckle. "Urban legends. Suits like that don't come down here. They buy politicians, not pavement." But the car was still there, and the boy hadn't moved an inch. He spat on the curb and straightened his jacket. "Doesn't matter whose name's on that ride. Out here, we decide who breathes easy." He strode back to the boy, closing the distance in 3 steps. "You hear that? We decide what happens here. Not your fancy family, not your driver, not your name." The boy's expression didn't change. His eyes lifted slightly, not to Rico, but past him, toward the car. That simple glance chilled Rico more than a gun barrel. Behind him, Jax whispered, "Boss, maybe we—" "Shut up," Rico snapped. He was too deep to back off now. Power didn't bend. It broke. He grabbed the boy's collar and shoved him lightly against the door, expecting flinching, fear, something. Nothing. The boy's voice came out level, almost curious. "Why are you shaking?" Rico froze. "What?" The boy tilted his head, calm as stone. "Your hand. It's shaking." For a second, Rico looked down and realized it was true. The laugh came to cover it, harsh and loud, echoing through the alley. "You got nerve, kid." He pushed again, harder this time. "Let's see how long that lasts when—" A sound stopped him. A quiet, mechanical hum. The car's back window was sliding down. Jax stepped back. Dino cursed under his breath. Rico's throat went dry, but his pride wouldn't let him move. He tried to laugh again, but it came out wrong, too thin. "Look at this, huh? Guess your babysitter finally woke up." The boy's reply was almost a whisper. "He never sleeps." Rico's grin faltered. He could feel something behind that glass. A presence, heavy and still, watching. Every instinct he'd ever honed told him to run. But men like Rico didn't run. Not until it was too late. He leaned closer to the glass, squinting, trying to see the face inside. The fog shifted just enough to show the faint outline of eyes, calm, unblinking, patient. Rico stepped back, the laugh caught in his throat. For the first time in years, Southbridge's king didn't feel like one, and the night, which had once been his kingdom, began to feel like someone else's hunting ground. The street fell silent the moment the laughter stopped. Even the rain seemed to hesitate, its rhythm thinning to a misty hiss against the pavement. Rico stood there, his smirk twitching, the sound of his own heartbeat louder than he wanted to admit. The black car hummed softly behind the boy, its engine alive, steady, patient, like something breathing just under the surface. The boy's voice broke the quiet, calm, and measured, almost too calm for his age. From that car. Rico frowned, leaning in. What did you say? The kid didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. The words hung there, thick and cold, sinking into the fog. Then came a soft, mechanical whir, the slow slide of tinted glass lowering inch by inch. Jax muttered something that died before it left his throat. Dino shifted his weight, eyes narrowing. The glass stopped halfway, and a sliver of light touched a face inside, pale under the lamplight, carved from something older than anger. Eyes like polished knives met the street. Rico blinked once, trying to piece the image with the whispers he'd heard over the years. The man inside wasn't reacting, wasn't even breathing heavy. He was simply watching. And somehow that was worse. What the hell? Jax whispered, voice cracking. The rest of the window descended, smooth as silk. The full face appeared now, sharp jawline, black coat, silver cufflink glinting with an emblem shaped like a lion. The silver caught the light just enough to burn its mark into Rico's mind. Dino's whisper barely carried over the wind. Boss, that's him. That's the Lion of Markelli. Rico's head snapped toward him. Shut up, he hissed, but the words came out thinner than he intended. The title echoed anyway, floating through the fog like a curse that had finally found its name. The Lion. The ghost of every deal gone wrong. The shadow behind every city rumor that started with a man in a black coat. Adrian Marcelli wasn't supposed to be real. At least, not in this part of the city. Not down here in Southbridge, where the empire of suits and silence rarely stepped off its marble perch. And yet here he was. The car's hum deepened, the idle rev vibrating through the wet curb. The tension felt alive now, crawling across the street like static. Every droplet of rain seemed to hang in the air, waiting for permission to fall. Adrian's driver, Santo, stepped out first, tall, clean-shaven, eyes scanning every window, every alley mouth. A silent shadow followed him, broader, his coat heavy with the shape of a weapon beneath. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence alone bent the atmosphere. Rico's voice wavered as he forced out a laugh. All right, what is this, huh? Some kind of act? He motioned to the car with his chin. You think you can just roll through my block and... The sound of a door unlatching cut through his sentence like a blade. The rear door opened, slow, deliberate. The fog seemed to lean away from it, parting in quiet respect. Adrian Marcelli stepped out, his coat flowing with the kind of grace that made every movement feel like choreography. He didn't hurry. He didn't posture. He just stood there, the streetlight tracing the edges of his profile, the faint scars near his temple, the silver threading in his hair, the eyes that could make a room stop breathing. Rico felt every instinct screaming at him to step back, but pride welded his boots to the curb. You lost, old man? He tried, voice higher than usual. This ain't your neighborhood. Adrian didn't respond. His gaze drifted past Rico to his son, Eli. The boy hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. The fog swirled between them like a line only they could see. Adrian gave a slight nod, nothing more. And the boy, the same kid Rico had been taunting minutes earlier, straightened his back, almost proud, as if standing inspection. The two bodyguards positioned themselves, one near the car door, one at the corner of the sidewalk. Neither spoke, but both kept their hands close, not threatening, just ready. It was ritual, not fear. Rico could feel the weight of invisible eyes pressing down from every dark window around them. Southbridge had gone quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when predators realize there's something higher on the food chain. Hey, Rico said, forcing another laugh. Look, I didn't mean nothing. Just a joke. Kid walked into the wrong block, that's all. No harm done. Adrian's eyes finally settled on him. The silence between them could have cut glass. For the first time, Rico understood what the old-timers meant when they said the lion didn't kill people. He ended them. Not loudly. Not with blood. With a stare that stripped every layer of noise and bravado until all that was left was truth. And in that truth, Rico saw something he hadn't felt in years. Fear that didn't need a weapon to exist. "You think you run these streets?" Adrian's voice was low, unhurried, smooth like something pulled from the bottom of a river. Rico swallowed hard. "I dash. I own the ground you bleed on." The words hit like a whisper with the weight of thunder. Behind him, Jax took a step back. Dino lowered his head. The silver lion on Adrian's cufflink caught the lamplight again, flashing briefly before sinking back into shadow. Rico's knees nearly gave out, but he steadied himself, forcing the grin back onto his face. "Man, I don't know who you think—" Adrian raised one finger, and Rico stopped speaking mid-breath. "I don't think," Adrian said softly. "I know." Then he turned to Eli, the tension easing just enough to shift the balance. "Did he frighten you?" Eli shook his head once. "No, sir." "Good," Adrian murmured. "Then you've learned what fear looks like when it belongs to someone else." The fog swallowed the words like scripture. Adrian turned his gaze back to Rico one last time. He didn't raise his hand, didn't gesture for violence. He just took a single step closer, close enough that Rico could smell the faint trace of cigar smoke and leather, the kind of scent that clings to a man who's buried more than he's bragged about. "You put your hand on my son," he said. Rico's mouth moved, but no sound came out. His chest was a drum of panic. Adrian leaned in just enough for his voice to find Rico's ear. "And yet you still breathe. Remember that." Then, just as quietly, he turned away. The bodyguards moved first, one closing the door, the other scanning once more before sliding back into the front seat. Adrian followed, unhurried, his shoes echoing against the wet concrete. The door shut, the sound sealing the night again. The engine purred once, low and final, and the black car rolled forward into the fog, its red taillights fading like the last warning of a dying flame. Rico didn't move for a long time. His chain felt heavier. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Southbridge Street, once his kingdom, had learned a new name tonight. And the king? He was just another man standing in the fog, realizing the crown he'd built was already slipping off his head. The fog thickened until it felt like the street itself was holding its breath. Rico couldn't tell if the sound he heard was rain or blood rushing in his ears. The black sedan's engine went quiet, and for a few long seconds there was nothing. No wind, no laughter, no movement, just stillness. Then Adrian Markelli began to walk. Each step was measured, deliberate, unhurried. The soles of his shoes met the wet pavement with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. Rico wanted to look away, but something about the man's pace, steady, unbroken, pinned him in place. Every instinct screamed to back up, but pride was a cruel anchor. He'd built his whole name on fear. He couldn't afford to show any now, not even to the devil himself. Behind Adrian, the two bodyguards remained near the car, one by the open door, the other with his eyes scanning the corners of Southbridge like a machine programmed for silence. They didn't need to move. Their stillness was a message on its own. Eli stood motionless beside the curb, his small hands by his sides, his eyes following his father with quiet certainty. He didn't look frightened. He didn't even look surprised. Rico took a breath to steady himself, but his chest felt tight, like the air had grown thick enough to choke on. Adrian stopped a few feet away. The fog swirled around his coat, making him seem larger than life, like he'd been carved from the darkness itself. When he finally spoke, the sound barely rose above a whisper, yet it carried across the whole street. "You put your hands on my son." The words hit Rico like a blow to the ribs, There was no shout, no rage, just the kind of calm that made everything worse. He opened his mouth to explain, to backtrack, to plead, but his voice cracked before it found shape. "Listen, man, I didn't know," he stammered. "I swear I didn't know who he was." Adrian tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing as if studying a problem rather than a person. "You don't need to know my name," he said quietly, "to understand respect." Rico swallowed hard. The streetlights reflected off the sweat gathering at his temples. Jax stood behind him, motionless, his usual grin gone. Dino's hand trembled as he reached for his pocket, not for a weapon, just something to hold. Anything. Adrian took another step closer. The scent of rain and faint cigar smoke followed him, mixing with the oil and grime of the street. Rico could see now that Adrian wasn't a big man, not physically, but there was a gravity to him, something that made the world shrink around his presence. He turned his gaze to Eli. "Did he scare you?" Eli shook his head once, his voice calm, unwavering. "No, sir." Adrian nodded. "Good," he said softly, eyes still on his son. Then he turned back to Rico, his tone like a blade sliding out of its sheath. "Then you've learned what fear looks like when it belongs to someone else." Rico's mouth went dry. He wanted to speak, to apologize again, to say it was a mistake. But the words wouldn't come. His throat locked, every muscle in his body heavy as stone. The realization hit him hard. This man didn't need a gun. He didn't need to shout, threaten, or draw blood. He could kill a man's soul with silence. Behind Adrian, one of his men shifted slightly, just enough to remind everyone that mercy here was optional. The fog carried the faint creak of leather, the click of a trigger's safety. Not drawn, not aimed, just there. A promise. Adrian stepped close enough for Rico to see the reflection of himself in those dark eyes. Small, trembling, unimportant. For the first time he understood the hierarchy of real power. Street fear was cheap, loud, temporary. This was something eternal. "Mr. Marcelli, I didn't mean—" Adrian cut him off with a raised hand. "You meant to be cruel," he said. "That's enough." The words were not angry, but final. Rico's chest tightened as Adrian leaned closer, close enough for the warmth of his breath to touch his ear. He whispered something, just one short sentence, that froze the blood in Rico's veins. Whatever it wasn't a threat. It was worse. It was truth. Adrian stepped back. Rico's lips parted, but no sound came out. His legs felt weak, like they no longer belonged to him. The man in the black coat turned away, his presence retreating like a tide pulling back from the shore. He didn't look back at Rico. Not even once. The bodyguards moved in perfect rhythm, one closing the car door, the other keeping his eyes on the street until Adrian was safely inside. Eli followed silently, his small figure swallowed by the fog as he reached for the car handle. For a brief moment, he looked over his shoulder, not with pity, but with the faint, knowing calm of someone who had seen a truth larger than himself. Then he disappeared into the car. The door shut with a soft, echoing click. The sound rang louder than any gunshot Rico had ever heard. The sedan's engine came alive again, smooth and quiet, the hum filling the street like a heartbeat returning to rest. The taillights glowed red for a moment before fading into the mist. Rico stood there long after they'd gone. His knees felt weak, his skin cold. The fog rolled back in to fill the space where Adrian had stood, but the air still carried his weight, his voice, his silence. Jax finally broke it. "Boss?" he whispered, uncertain. Rico didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was dry, and his pulse wouldn't slow. He could still feel the whisper against his ear, the words repeating themselves, burning through the walls of his mind like acid. He dropped his cigarette, realizing it had burned down to his fingers. The ember hissed out in a puddle, leaving only a thin curl of smoke. He took a step back, stumbled once, caught himself. His voice came out low, almost to himself. He didn't even raise his voice. The words hung there, lost in the fog, as Southbridge Street slowly began to breathe again. But for Rico, the air would never feel light again. The night never ended for Rico. It just changed color. By the time the fog thinned and the streetlights dimmed, he was back in his hideout, a one-room trap buried behind an auto shop, walls yellowed from smoke, air heavy with stale sweat and paranoia. The place that once felt like a throne room now felt like a coffin with windows. Jax paced the floor, muttering under his breath. Dino sat by the door, his knee bouncing in nervous rhythm. Neither spoke to Rico directly at first. The silence between them was too fragile to touch. Finally, Jax broke. "We can't just sit here, man. We gotta move. Get the hell out of Southbridge." Dino snorted. "Run where? You think you can hide from him? The Lion's got eyes in every precinct, every alley." Rico didn't answer. His hands were still trembling, his cigarette burning down between two fingers he couldn't feel. The whisper echoed in his skull, not loud, but endless. He could still feel the warmth of Adrian's breath on his ear, still see those eyes, calm and final. The words, that voice, they'd buried themselves somewhere deeper than fear. Jax slammed a fist into the wall. "Say something, boss. You just gonna sit there?" Rico's gaze lifted, unfocused. He opened his mouth, but what came out wasn't anger. It was almost disbelief. "He didn't even touch me." Jax frowned. "What?" He didn't shout, didn't draw a gun. Just looked at me, whispered. Rico's hand went to his throat, as if the words were still lodged there. And now I can't stop hearing it. The two men exchanged a look. They'd seen their leader bleed before, seen him take beatings and crawl back meaner than ever. But this was different. Rico looked hollow, like something inside him had been scooped out and replaced with silence. Dino cleared his throat. "Maybe it's all in your head. Some kind of trick. Mafia mind games, you know? You shake it off, boss." Rico's laugh was dry and broken. "You ever stare at something so long it starts staring back?" That's what he did. That man looked through me, like he was already writing my obituary. Jax leaned forward. So what did he say? What did he whisper? Rico stared into space. The rain outside began again, soft against the tin roof. For a moment, it almost sounded like a heartbeat. He said, his voice trailed off, the memory strangling it before it formed. He shook his head. "Forget it, don't matter. You wouldn't understand." Dino muttered, "Try us." But Rico didn't. He just reached for the bottle on the table, half a fifth of cheap bourbon, and poured straight into his mouth. The liquid hit his throat like fire, but it didn't burn enough to wash the whisper away. He kept drinking. The room grew smaller with every gulp, the air thick with the sound of rain, the flick of lighters, the crack of glass against wood. Flashbacks came uninvited, fists in the dark, sirens in alleys, the echo of his father's belt. He'd survived every kind of violence a man could face. Prison fights, ambushes, even the day he took a knife to the ribs in a basement deal gone wrong. He had never been scared of pain. Pain was honest. You could hit it back. But this was something else. A silence that grew teeth. He saw Adrian's eyes again, not angry, not even judging, just knowing, like he'd already seen how Rico's story would end. The whisper twisted through his mind again, softer this time, almost tender. His stomach turned. He poured another shot. Jax slammed his hand on the table. "Enough! You ain't the only one who saw him. Yeah, he's big time, but he bleeds like anyone else. You give the word, we get guns, we hit back. Rico's eyes flicked up, glassy. You don't hit men like him, Jax. You just stop existing when he's done thinking about you. The words chilled even Dino, who'd always laughed at death. They argued after that, whispered threats, plans, half-measures born from desperation. Some wanted to disappear. Some wanted to go down shooting. Rico said nothing. He just kept drinking, his reflection in the cracked mirror behind him turning stranger by the hour. Outside, the city was changing. Word had spread. Every corner, every bar, every whisper carried the same story. The Lion walked Southbridge last night. Cops kept their patrols short. Dealers stashed their goods and prayed. Even politicians upstate pretended not to hear the rumor. You didn't say the Marcelli name out loud now. You respected it with silence. By midnight, Southbridge felt haunted, and in one corner of that haunted city, Adrian Marcelli stood by his window, staring down at the lights far below. The view from his estate was clean, precise, untroubled, a world away from the dirt he had built his empire on. A half-empty glass of red wine glowed in his hand, like blood in the light. Behind him, the room smelled of mahogany and leather. Old portraits watched him in quiet judgment, generations of men who'd ruled before him. Eli stood near the doorway, small but steady. He hadn't spoken since they'd left Southbridge. Now he did. Would you have killed him, Father? Adrian didn't turn. He let the question hang in the air, swirling like the wine in his glass. Then he smiled faintly. Not warmth, not cruelty, just understanding. No, he said. He'll do that himself, slowly. Eli frowned. You mean he'll hurt himself? Adrian's eyes found the boy's reflection in the window. Guilt, fear, paranoia. They're sharper than bullets. Some men live through beatings. No one lives through their own mind. Eli was silent, but the meaning stayed with him. Adrian turned back to the window, the faint hum of the city below rising like distant thunder. The world teaches lessons, son. But sometimes, men like Rico, they need the quiet kind. He took a sip of his wine, savoring the stillness. The storm outside didn't bother him. He'd already seen it break. Down in Southbridge, Rico emptied his bottle and reached for another, his body trembling, his mind unraveling. The whisper came again, clearer this time, repeating in rhythm with his pulse. He slammed his fist against the table to drown it out, but it only echoed louder inside his skull. In the silence that followed, Rico began to laugh, a hollow, broken sound that didn't belong to him anymore. Somewhere deep inside, he finally understood what Adrian Marcelli had meant when he said respect doesn't need a name. It just needed to whisper once, and never stop. The streets no longer bowed when Rico Darnell walked them. Once, every whisper carried his name. Now, those same whispers hid behind locked doors, muttered in corners, cut short when he passed. The king of Southbridge had become a ghost, and the ghosts weren't loyal to anyone. By the end of the week, half his dealers had vanished. The ones who stayed wouldn't meet his eyes. Calls went unanswered. Payments dried up. His men, the ones who used to swear they'd die for him, stopped showing up at the bar they once called their headquarters. Even Jax had gone silent. Dino was last to leave, muttering something about not wanting to be next on that man's list. Rico tried to convince himself it didn't matter. He'd been alone before, built everything from scraps. He could rebuild it again. But every night, as he sat in the dark of his hideout, the whisper wouldn't stop. He'd started hearing it in the hum of streetlights, in the shuffle of footsteps outside, in the low growl of car engines idling just a little too long. Black sedans, always black, always there. Sometimes they'd appear at the end of the block, headlights glowing faintly through the fog. Other times they sat by the curb beneath his window, engine running, never moving. By the time Rico grabbed his gun and stormed outside, they'd be gone. Only the smell of burnt rubber left behind, like someone laughing at his fear. He told himself it was coincidence. A city like this had 1,000 black cars. But deep down, he knew better. The lion didn't need to kill him. He was doing it himself, inch by inch, thought by thought. One morning, he went to check his stash house on Halton Street. It was gone. The door ripped from its hinges, the place stripped clean. Not just by cops, by professionals. No traces, no prints, not even the smell of the product left behind. His entire operation, months of work, erased in a single night. He called his supplier in Newark. No answer. He called again and again, until finally someone picked up and said 3 words before hanging up. "Don't call again." That was when Rico understood. This wasn't random. It was methodical, precise. Every piece of his world being dismantled quietly, perfectly, like clockwork. He went to one of his bars, the one he used to call his castle. The bartender looked away when he walked in. His old booth was taken by strangers. The drinks stopped being on the house. Even the junkies had learned to keep their distance. They crossed the street when they saw him coming. A man who once made fear his weapon had become infected by it. That night, he dreamed of Adrian again. The same eyes, the same silence, the same whisper he could never fully remember. Only feel. It followed him through the dream like smoke, curling around his throat, soft and suffocating. He woke up sweating, heart pounding, convinced someone was in the room. He swept the corners with his gun, breathing hard. Nothing. Just the walls closing in, covered now in scribbled notes he didn't remember writing. He's watching. Don't look outside. The lion sees everything. Every time he looked at those words, his chest tightened. The handwriting didn't even look like his own anymore. By the end of the second week, the money was gone. His accounts were frozen. His contacts either blocked his number or sent polite messages that said nothing. The gangs that once paid him tribute had switched allegiance overnight. The Marcelli name now ruled the silence that used to belong to him. He still carried his gun, but even it felt useless, a toy in a world that no longer cared about bullets. He saw another sedan outside his window one night. This time he didn't move. He just watched it. The headlights stayed on, low and steady, staring back like eyes that never blinked. He waited for hours, gripping the pistol tight. At dawn, when he blinked for half a second, the car was gone. That broke something in him. He started staying inside all day, blinds drawn, gun on the table, bottle in hand. The city beyond his window was still alive, but it no longer had a sound he recognized. No one came knocking. No one called him boss. The whispers still did. They filled the room when the wind came through the vents. They spoke in the hiss of the radiator, in the creak of floorboards, in the tap of rain against glass. Sometimes it was Adrian's voice. Sometimes it was his own. "You don't need to know my name to understand respect." He screamed at the walls until his throat gave out. Days bled together. He barely ate. The smell of sweat, whiskey, and fear filled the apartment. Trash piled up. Cigarette burns dotted the carpet like bullet holes. The crown he'd built, gold chains, cash stacks, guns, all sat on the floor beside him, worthless relics of a kingdom that had never really been his. He tried to fight back one last time. He called the few numbers he had left, men he thought still owed him loyalty. They didn't pick up. The only call he got was from a blocked number. He almost didn't answer. When he finally did, there was no voice, just the faint sound of a man exhaling, slow, controlled, familiar. Rico froze. "Who is this?" The line went dead. The bottle fell from his hand and shattered. By the time night came, he'd started tearing down the blinds, convinced there were cameras hidden behind them. He painted over the windows, ripped out the light bulbs, scribbled across the walls in black marker. Phrases that didn't make sense even to him. He's in the mirrors. Don't sleep. The lion doesn't forget. He tore through drawers, ripping up photographs, receipts, anything with his name on it. The walls seemed to breathe with him, echoing every heartbeat, every paranoid gasp. By dawn, the only sound left in the apartment was his own breathing. He sat on the floor in front of the mirror, the last unbroken thing in the room. His reflection stared back, pale and sunken-eyed, a ghost wearing his face. For a long time he didn't move. Then he whispered it, almost gently. You didn't even raise your voice. A smile crept onto his cracked lips. Not joy, just surrender. Outside, the city was waking. Cars rolled by. Somewhere, a black sedan idled for a moment at the curb before disappearing into the mist. Inside the apartment, Rico Darnell, once king of Southbridge, sat surrounded by the ruins of his own reign. The scribbles on the wall glowed faintly under the pale light from the street. The lion sees everything. The courtyard smelled of rain and roses. Morning light spilled over the marble steps, soft and golden, glinting off the fountain at the center. A lion carved in stone, its mouth pouring water into a still pool. The air was calm now, untouched by the chaos that had swept through Southbridge only nights before. Birds perched on the iron gate sang faintly, unbothered by the weight of the world their master carried. Adrian Marcelli walked slowly along the cobblestone path, hands clasped behind his back. His black coat brushed lightly against the trimmed hedges, each step deliberate, quiet. Beside him, Eli kept pace, smaller, thoughtful, his face still etched with the remnants of what he'd seen. The boy broke the silence first. Why didn't you stop him sooner? Adrian didn't answer right away. His gaze lingered on the lion fountain, on the reflection of the beast in the rippling water. Then, softly, he said, Because a lion doesn't chase rats, Eli. He waits until they bite his cubs. Eli frowned, turning that over in his head. But you knew he was dangerous. You could have stopped him before he touched me. Adrian's eyes flicked to his son, not with anger, but patience. And what would you have learned if I had? Eli hesitated. The question settled heavy between them. He glanced away, to the statues of angels lining the courtyard walls. Their faces were serene, their wings chipped by time, but somehow they seemed to be listening too. Adrian continued walking. You're growing up in a world where fear is louder than truth. Men like Rico live off that noise. They mistake volume for power. He paused, resting a hand on the cold marble edge of the fountain. But true power isn't in the roar. It's in knowing when not to use it. Eli looked up at him. So, you were testing me? In part, Adrian said, but not just you. He turned the wine ring of a fountain coin between his fingers, some forgotten wish from another night. I was testing him too. I wanted to see if he understood respect. He didn't. The wind moved gently through the courtyard, stirring the branches overhead. Somewhere, deep inside the house, a clock chimed 10. Eli thought about the man in the street, the fear in his eyes, the way his voice broke when Adrian spoke. You didn't even touch him, he said quietly. Adrian smiled faintly. A real man wins before the fight even begins. He began to walk again, slower now. Your grandfather taught me that when I was younger than you. I didn't believe him then. I thought power meant control. That control came from fear, and fear came from force. I was wrong. Eli's brow furrowed. Then what is power? Adrian's steps stopped at the shadow of a tall cypress tree. He looked toward the mansion, the old stone walls, the wrought iron balcony, the life he'd built through decades of calculated silence. Power is understanding the cost of violence and choosing not to pay it unless you must. It's knowing every man has a breaking point and making sure you never have to reach yours. Eli listened, the faint splash of the fountain filling the quiet between words. He wanted to ask more, about the people his father had faced, the men who had feared him long before Rico Darnell ever knew his name. But something in Adrian's tone stopped him. It wasn't pride. It was weariness. "You didn't just scare him," Eli said softly. "You broke him." Adrian exhaled, not in satisfaction, but in thought. "No, son. He broke himself. I simply gave him silence to listen to what he'd done." They reached the end of the path, where the garden met the courtyard wall. Vines crept over old stone, the smell of lavender hanging in the air. Adrian paused there, his reflection caught in the polished metal of a nearby statue. "The streets will remember what happened," he said. "They'll whisper about the Lion of Marcelli walking through Southbridge. They'll turn it into legend, but legend is a dangerous thing. It feeds both respect and envy." Eli kicked at a loose pebble. "Is that why you stay quiet all the time? So no one knows when to fear you?" Adrian's lips curved into the faintest smile. "I stay quiet because the world doesn't need more noise. Men who talk too much often lose their power before they realize they've spent it." Eli thought about that for a long moment. "And what about me?" he asked finally. "What do you want me to learn from all this?" Adrian turned to him fully, his face calm but stern. "That control is worth more than revenge. That strength is nothing without discipline. And that one day, you'll have to choose whether you want to be feared or respected." Eli's eyes lifted to meet his father's. "Which one are you?" Adrian smiled faintly, the question hitting deeper than the boy intended. "Both," he said. "But I only earned the second after I learned how to survive the first." The boy nodded slowly, understanding beginning to take root. Adrian reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, firm but warm. "Remember this night, Eli. The street remembers it too. But what matters more is that you do. Power is a weight, one you must carry carefully. Drop it, and it destroys you. Hold it too tight, and it consumes you." They stood there together, father and son, in the stillness of the courtyard. The fountain gurgled softly. The air smelled of rain and stone and quiet understanding. After a while, Eli asked, "Do you think he'll come back?" Adrian shook his head. "No. Rico Darnell is gone, even if he's still breathing. Some men die when you shoot them. Others die when they realize they never mattered." Eli was quiet for a long time after that. The lesson wasn't about fear anymore. It wasn't even about respect. It was about control, about the quiet, deliberate patience that made his father what he was. As they turned back toward the house, the morning light caught the lion fountain one last time, the water glinting gold as it spilled over the marble rim. Adrian looked at it briefly, then down at his son. "One day," he said, "you'll have to be the one who decides when silence becomes power." Eli nodded, his small shoulders straightening. "I understand." Adrian's hand lingered on his shoulder for a moment longer. "Good," he said. "Then the world won't have to remind you the hard way." They walked on, the echo of their footsteps fading beneath the sound of the fountain, a father's lesson still rippling long after the words were gone. Weeks passed, and Southbridge changed its sound. The laughter that once echoed through its alleys, crude, sharp, and violent, had faded into something else. Quieter, cautious. The street that had once belonged to men like Rico Darnell now belonged to whispers. No one saw him again after that night. Some said he fled to the coast, shaved his head, and boarded a freighter out of the country. Others swore his body was found in an abandoned warehouse by the docks, half rotted, eyes open like he'd died, still seeing something no one else could. But no report made the papers. No police ever came asking. The city knew better. Southbridge didn't bury its ghosts, it let them linger. And somewhere in those cracks of silence, a new order settled in. Not written, not spoken, just understood. The black sedan still passed through once in a while, smooth and unhurried, its tinted windows reflecting the neon glow of shop signs and streetlights. No one ever stopped it. No one ever tried to look inside. When they heard that engine hum, even the boldest of them stepped back onto the curb and lowered their eyes. It wasn't fear anymore. It was reverence, the kind born from understanding who truly owned the ground beneath their shoes. Adrian Marcelli didn't need to reclaim Southbridge with blood. He'd done it with silence. And in that silence, something unexpected began to grow. Dealers stopped running corners. The smaller gangs scattered or turned legitimate. The old graffiti tags of Rico's crew were painted over, some by the city, some by hands that had once drawn them. Bars that used to host shootouts became quiet places where old men drank in peace. Kids could walk to school without crossing themselves at every intersection. It wasn't paradise. Southbridge never would be. But it was stable, controlled, balanced by a kind of quiet fear that somehow made room for safety. And in that balance walked a boy in a red jacket, Eli Marcelli. Every morning he passed through those same streets. No guards, no entourage, no gunmen watching from rooftops. Just him. The locals knew who he was. They didn't say his name, but they nodded. A mechanic would lift his cap. A woman selling fruit would hand him an apple, no charge. Even the stray dogs trailed behind him for a while before drifting back into the alleys. He carried himself like his father, calm, measured, but without the heaviness that weighed on older men. He was young, but his eyes already knew the difference between noise and power. At the far end of the block, a mural had appeared. No one knew who painted it. It showed a lion in silver tones, its mane shaped like smoke, its eyes two faint streaks of gold. Beneath it, the words, "Respect the silence." Eli paused there sometimes, looking up at it. He never smiled, but his expression softened, as if hearing an old story retold in a language only he understood. The city around him hummed with new rhythm, traffic lights blinking in time with street sounds, vendors calling softly, engines purring. But beneath it all was something deeper. The memory of that night, the boy who didn't flinch, the father who didn't shout, the man who vanished into the fog. In the mansions uptown, politicians called it peace. In the alleys of Southbridge, they called it balance. But to those who had seen the lion, it was something closer to law. Inside his estate, Adrian Marcelli stood by his window once again, glass of wine in hand. The city lights below glimmered faintly through the mist, reflecting across his eyes like distant stars. Behind him, the faint sound of Eli's laughter carried from the courtyard. Free, unguarded, alive. He let it wash over him for a moment. That sound was worth more than all the empires he'd built or burned. In his world, mercy was not softness, it was precision. The kind that left no noise, no trail, no blood unless absolutely necessary. The kind his son was beginning to understand. The streets didn't fear the lion because he was cruel. They feared him because he never needed to prove he wasn't. Later that night, Eli joined him by the window. "Southbridge feels different now," he said. "Quieter." Adrian nodded. "That's how you know it remembers." They stood together in silence, watching the faint glow of headlights fade through the mist. Eli's voice broke the quiet once more. "Do you think they'll forget?" Adrian shook his head slowly. "No. Streets have long memories. They remember the noise that built them, and the silence that saved them." The boy thought about that, eyes tracing the horizon. The fog outside curled and drifted like smoke rising from a candle's flame, the final breath of a story ending the only way it could. And somewhere, beneath the hum of the city, an unspoken legend took root, not in newspapers or police reports, but in the rhythm of footsteps, the hush of alleyways, the glances exchanged when a black car passed too close. They whispered it quietly, but everyone knew the tale. The gang leader who laughed at the wrong boy, the father who didn't raise his gun because he didn't need to, and the street that learned silence is sometimes the loudest sound of all. By midnight, Southbridge was asleep. The fog had rolled in thick, muffling the noise of the world. From a distance, a low engine purred, steady and deep, the sound of a car gliding through the mist like a shadow returning home. Its headlights cut through the fog for a brief moment, two silver eyes scanning the street that once belonged to chaos. Then, as quietly as it came, it vanished into the night. And in the wake of that silence, Southbridge breathed easy, watched over by the lion who no longer needed to roar. If this story has your attention, hit that subscribe button and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Every story we tell connects the past to the present, and we'd love to have you with us for the next one.